Michigan versus Alabama. Big Ten champion versus SEC champion. Jim Harbaugh versus Nick Saban. You throw it in front of the beautiful San Gabriel Mountains at one of the most prestigious and historic stadiums in the world. Oh yeah, there's also a spot in the College Football Playoff National Championship on the line. This season's Rose Bowl has it all.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
What more could you want from a college football game? Boy, it's hard to add things to the list because this game has everything. When I look at both of these teams, Saban's Crimson Tide and Harbaugh's Wolverines, man, they are very similar teams. And Olivia Newton-John would love both of these teams because they get physical. Okay, these teams want to win in the trenches. Both of these teams have great defenses. Both of these teams have good quarterbacks that can be great. And both of these teams want to ground and pound their way to victory. When I first start to break this one down, I want to start with a problem. And right now, Michigan has a postseason problem. 6 consecutive bowl losses. There's one Outback Bowl loss in there. The other 5 are all New Year's 6 games for Michigan. They did not go to a bowl game in 2020. But I really want to focus in on the last 2. 2021, the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia had, dare I say, a generational defense that season, coordinated by Dan Lanning, by the way. So maybe you can excuse that a little bit. The first of back-to-back national championship teams for Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs. But last year, I think that's the one that's very frustrating, maybe the most frustrating out of all of these losses. Maybe you can excuse all the rest of them, but not last year, where you're coming in against a TCU team that you feel pretty good about. They came off a loss in the Big 12 championship game to Kansas State. You were riding a high, beating Ohio State for 2 straight seasons, winning back-to-back Big Ten titles, but falling to TCU. Those 2 pick sixes costing the Wolverines a shot to play for a national championship that they very well could have won last season. It's been frustrating, this whole run. Michigan, especially the last 2 seasons. And then this year, this being the 3rd season. You beat Ohio State all these years. You win the Big Ten, beating your opponents in the Big Ten championship game. All that's great, but they haven't been able to win this big one. If this is indeed the last dance for Jim Harbaugh, what's his legacy going to be if he can't get it done against Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide? It's going to be, you can win all those games against Ohio State, those last 3. You can win 3 consecutive Big Ten championships. You can do that, and that's great. But once you get to that next level, once you get to that national championship, semifinals, title type of level, you can't get the job done. Jim Harbaugh doesn't want to leave Ann Arbor that way. Jim Harbaugh doesn't want to leave his legacy that way if this is indeed the last dance for Harbaugh and these Wolverines. All right, let's start to dive into this one a little bit more, some X's and O's. Nick Saban, we know all about Alabama. We know all about the dynasty, right? This is arguably the program in all of college football. He's had some great teams. He's had some great players. Out of all of the great teams that Nick Saban has had since he took over in the mid to late 2000s, this is not one of his best teams. It's not. But don't let that fool you. This is still a team with a really, really good defense. This is still a team with a good offense as well. And if you sleep on them, you get a little bit sleepy, they can beat you. They can run it down your throat, and they can hit the deep ball over the top. Like when you look at Alabama, 0 is the number of skill players, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, that are all SEC this year. You look at it on the defensive side of the ball, they have 5 all SEC players on the defensive side of the football. The big key for Michigan is going to be containing Jalen Milroe. Okay, I watched that SEC championship game against the Georgia Bulldogs, especially late in that game. The running ability of Jalen Milroe is what put the Crimson Tide over the top. Georgia's defense start to wear down a little bit, and the unpredictability, so to speak, of Jalen and what he can do with his legs was the difference in the game and getting them to this college football playoff as well. You need to make Jalen Milroe a traditional quarterback because the design QB run game, RPOs, getting outside the pocket, freelancing, throwing on the run, all that sort of stuff, that's an added dimension towards a defensive game plan. That's something extra that they have to deal with, and that's an extra weapon that Jalen Milroe has at his disposal. Michigan edge rushers, Michigan defensive end, linebackers, whoever it is, wider than the widest. You need to keep Jalen Milroe within the tackle box. Okay, we know it, a key every single week for Michigan and a lot of these Big Ten defenses get pressure because they're really good at it. Michigan is another one of those teams. They're really good at getting pressure. But sometimes if you bring the heat and the first guy doesn't get there and the second guy doesn't get there, all of a sudden now Milroe can get to the outside. So maybe a strategic pass rush of sorts could be in order for Jesse Minter and this Michigan football team as well. Let's kind of flip over to the other side of the ball. Let's talk about the Michigan Wolverines, right? Maybe now more than ever, in this game more than ever, they need to run the football. Because when you look at the other side of the coin, when you look at Alabama, they have one of the best secondaries in all of college football. And I question the ability of maybe some of these Michigan wide receivers to get open on a consistent basis. Like if you see a scenario where Blake Corum is held to 70 yards, 80 yards, and Michigan is right around the 100, maybe just below 100 yards rushing on the day, and JJ McCarthy has to throw it for 200, maybe has to throw it for 300, I'm not sure if that's a recipe for success against this Alabama Crimson Tide team. You need to run the football. I think there's going to be some run lanes open. Now, although Georgia only rushed for 78 yards against this Alabama defense in the SEC title game, how about that game against the Auburn Tigers where the Crimson Tide gave up not 100, not 200, but 244 yards of rushing on this Tigers team that also lost to New Mexico State. 5.8 yards a carry for Auburn in that game. I believe that Michigan can line up and establish a run game of sorts. How good is it going to be? How often and how consistently they can do it could determine if Michigan does advance to Houston to play in the national championship game. I mentioned the secondary. When you look at these all SEC performers, there are 3 all SEC players in the secondary for the Alabama Crimson Tide, 2 of them at corner. Terry and Arnold, 11 pass breakups and 5 interceptions. I can see it now. Michigan fans are maybe having a flashback to last season's game against TCU, right, where JJ threw multiple interceptions. Maybe having a flashback to that Maryland game late in this season where he threw some interceptions that didn't look too great either. Kool-Aid McKinstry is on the other side. Now, he's been dealing with some injuries. Out of the players that have been dealing with injuries for Alabama, McKinstry and Jace McClellan, right, have been some of the big ones. It sounds like McKinstry is closer to getting back on the field than maybe someone like Jace McClellan is. So you're going to have to watch it. That is one of the best corner tandems in all of college football. Caleb Downs back there at safety leads the team with 99 tackles and has 2 interceptions as well. Maybe look for the tight ends as a key in this one. A.J. Barner and Colston Loveland. What are going to be the matchups? I mentioned the safety, Caleb Downs. Maybe getting these tight ends on a linebacker up the seam. We've seen Michigan do different things with Colston Loveland. We've seen them line him up in the slot and try to take advantage of a mismatch at that spot. It would not surprise me if Colston Loveland has a big-time game within the Rose Bowl here in this matchup. I'm also concerned for Michigan on the offensive line. Of course, the loss of Zach Zinter maybe late in the season caused things to shuffle around. And this kind of new group, right, without one of the anchors of that line in Zinter, okay, you had half of that game or whatever it was against Ohio State. And then you had the full game against Iowa in the Big Ten title game. This was an Michigan offensive line that gave up 4 sacks to the Hawkeyes in that game. And they're dealing with some pretty darn good pass rushers. I mentioned the secondary. There are some really good pass rushers. You have got to have an eye on Dallas Turner at all times. 13.5 TFLs and 9 sacks this season, but he's not the only one. Chris Braswell and Justin Ebogbe, they are menaces. Those two guys have combined for 22 TFLs and 15 sacks. This Michigan pass protection is going to have to be good. You're going to have to throw the ball at some time. This is not going to be a Penn State game where you can just run it the entire fourth quarter, where you can just run it and not have JJ McCarthy put the ball in the air at all. That's not what this game is going to be. There's too much time to prepare, and Nick Saban and everybody over there at Alabama, they know what Michigan wants to do. They know that they're going to want to line up and run this football. So pass protection is going to be huge, and I think it's going to be a big challenge for Michigan considering the shuffling that they've had recently along that offensive line as well. Man, what more could you want from a college football game? I think the key for the Wolverines, establish a great run game. I think there are lanes. I think there are seams for Blake Corum to run through. Take a little bit of pressure off of JJ McCarthy, set him up into favorable passing situations. You get him late in the game at a 3rd and 10s, 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12, and you're down, and maybe he feels like he's got to force the ball into a window. There are guys on this Alabama defense, there are guys in this Alabama secondary that can take the football away, and they will take the football away. Out of the 2 semifinals, you got one current Big Ten team, one future Big Ten team. This one's got me, I think, more nervous, okay, than maybe out in the Sugar Bowl, believe it or not. I see what Michigan has been like in the postseason as of late. I've seen at times late in the season, JJ McCarthy not throwing the ball a bunch against Penn State. I saw not performing the best against Maryland. I saw that Big Ten championship game, the offensive line specifically against Iowa, not looking overly impressive against the Hawkeyes. I've seen this late season push for Michigan, and I know they've been facing some really good Big Ten defenses, but this is another really good defense in the Alabama Crimson Tide. Who can be more physical? That team might be playing for a national championship in Houston.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.